The report revealing that over 3 million children died in 2022 due to drug-resistant infections is not just a grim data point. It's a catastrophic failure of global health systems, one that signals a dangerous unraveling of our most basic medical safety nets. The findings from this new study should not be seen as a surprising development, but as a long overdue reckoning. Antimicrobial resistance, or AMR, has been quietly escalating for decades, and now the consequences are becoming impossible to ignore, especially for children, whose fragile immune systems and limited treatment options make them the most vulnerable victims in this unfolding crisis. This isn't just about infections becoming harder to treat. It's about the collapse of our assumptions around modern medicine. Antibiotics, once a miracle intervention that transformed public health in the 20th century, are now losing their power at an alarming pace. Bacteria have evolved to outsmart the drugs we rely on to keep our most routine medical procedures safe. What this means, in practical terms, is that millions of children are now dying from conditions that, just a few years ago, were considered easily treatable. Pneumonia, sepsis, urinary tract infections, and even skin wounds can now turn lethal, not because the infection is more aggressive, but because our medicines no longer work. The implications of this are far-reaching and terrifying. Drug-resistant bacteria do not respect borders or wealth. But in poor regions of Africa and Southeast Asia, where medical infrastructure is weaker and clean water, vaccines, and sanitation are not always available, children are paying the heaviest price. This is not just a regional tragedy, it is a global emergency with inequity at its core. The poorest countries are being hit hardest, not only because of exposure but because of inaction and complacency from wealthier nations and international agencies that failed to treat AMR as the existential threat it is. This is not merely a spike in illness. According to the researchers, the number of child deaths linked to AMR has increased more than tenfold in just 3 years. That level of acceleration suggests a system already overwhelmed, and the COVID-19 pandemic only poured gasoline on the fire. During the pandemic, antibiotics were overprescribed on a massive scale, often without diagnostic justification, both in hospitals and at home. The panic, combined with uncertainty and the lack of rapid testing, led to widespread use of antibiotics to cover all bases, even when infections were viral. The unintended result? A surge in drug-resistant strains that are now killing children who were never supposed to be in danger. Even more chilling is the explosive increase in the use of so-called watch and reserve antibiotics, the last lines of defense. These drugs are supposed to be saved for only the most serious, multi-drug-resistant infections, but in Southeast Asia and Africa, their usage jumped by over 100% between 2019 and 2021. That's not just unsustainable, it's reckless. These are the drugs we rely on when everything else fails, and they're being drained now during peacetime, without any plan for what comes next. And what comes next may be even worse. Because once bacteria become resistant to these final resort drugs, there will be little left in the medical arsenal. We are staring at the possibility of a post-antibiotic era, not a future science fiction scenario, but a reality that is already arriving in hospital wards around the world. If children in 2022 are already dying in the millions due to infections that were once curable, what will 2030 look like if no action is taken? There is no single fix. Scientists and doctors emphasize that AMR is deeply woven into every aspect of modern life. Antibiotics are in our food, our livestock, our soil, and our water. They are misused in agriculture, overprescribed in clinics, sold without prescription in some countries, and flushed into the environment by pharmaceutical manufacturers. Meanwhile, the pipeline for new antibiotics has dried up.
Why?
Because antibiotic development is financially unappealing to pharmaceutical companies. It's expensive, time-consuming, and ultimately unprofitable because these drugs are meant to be used sparingly. As a result, innovation has stalled, and bacteria have been handed the upper hand. Perhaps most damning of all is how preventable much of this is. The majority of infections that kill children, diarrheal disease, lower respiratory infections, sepsis, are intimately tied to poor sanitation, inadequate vaccination coverage, and a lack of basic hygiene infrastructure. In other words, children are not dying from superbugs because the science failed. They're dying because society did. The deaths are not just a result of bacterial evolution, but of political inertia, failed investments in clean water and sanitation, and global apathy toward the health of the poor. The consequences are not limited to these regions. As drug-resistant bacteria spread across borders, hitching rides in food, travel, and commerce, no country remains safe. If modern medicine loses its ability to fight common infections, then childbirth, organ transplants, cancer chemotherapy, and even minor surgeries will become high risk again. This is the silent dismantling of everything modern healthcare has achieved. What this new data offers is not just evidence, it is a warning, as loud and urgent as any we've heard in recent memory. We are on the brink of a global health collapse, driven not by a new pandemic, but by our own misuse and neglect of one of medicine's greatest tools. Without immediate, coordinated, and large-scale global action across governments, health systems, and the pharmaceutical industry, the deaths of these 3 million children in 2022 will be just the beginning. If we continue to ignore this, the future will look more like the past, a world where simple infections kill and where the promise of modern medicine dies with the next generation.